So first, we're just going to go over graphing linear inequalities, and then we'll solve some linear inequalities as well.
So just a question with these, why aren't they like circles anymore?
It just depends on the textbook. So unfortunately, this textbook chose to use brackets and parentheses instead of open circles and closed circles, if that's what you're used to. When you take college algebra, if you take that next, that textbook goes back to using open circles and closed circles. So it's just a preference of whoever wrote the textbook.
So they try to confuse everyone.
Yeah, unfortunately, since more of you are used to the open circles and closed circles, it is confusing. The only good news about the parentheses and brackets is then they match whatever you have here, right? So you're like, okay, well, these are parentheses, right? So if there's a parenthesis at -2, then I know there has to be a parenthesis at -2. So even if I don't understand anything else about this problem, I automatically know that the only answers are A or B and not C or D, right? Because you can see that there's a parenthesis at -2. And then if you're like, okay, so it's going from -infinity up to -2. What I sometimes like to do, if it helps, is kind of label the number lines to remind yourself -infinity is always forever to the left. Positive infinity is always forever to the right. So if I do that on both of these graphs, right, then I can see that the one that actually shaded from -infinity to -2 would be answer B. Okay. So 28, x is less than 1/11. So let me go over that, make sure we're all clear. So if you see x is that symbol, so if you see x like that, it's saying x is less than. So you're going to shade to the left, if that helps. And x is greater than. So here it's x is less than 11. Since it says less than, since there's no equal sign here, you're going to use parentheses, right? So you're going to use parentheses because it's not allowed to equal that number, right? So anytime you see this symbol or this symbol, you're going to use parentheses with the number, right? Anytime you see this symbol or this symbol where it's allowed to equal the number, you're going to use a bracket. Now with the infinities, you're always going to use parentheses because you cannot actually equal -infinity or positive infinity. So those will always be parentheses, but I'm talking about the number in the problem. Whether you use a parenthesis or bracket with it is determined by whether there's the little equal sign underneath of it. Okay, so here, is it going to be a parentheses or a bracket?
Parentheses.
Okay, so we can automatically eliminate the brackets, right? So that's the nice thing, is you can be like, these are not my answer. So we're looking between A and B, or A and C, sorry. Which one is it going to be here?
A.
So we want to look and say, okay, x is less than 1/11. So that means we're going to shade to the left, right? Because if we're less than something, it has to be smaller than it. So we're shading to the left. So your answer here would be A. And then how could we write that in interval notation? Well, like I mentioned before, forever left is always -infinity, forever right is always positive infinity, right? So here we're going forever left because you always have to read a number line from left to right. So the order does matter that you write your answer in. So here we're starting at -infinity. And like I was saying a minute ago, with parentheses, you always use, or with infinity, you always use parentheses. So here, this is going to be -infinity. And then we're going up to the number 1/11. And then at 1/11, you can just copy the symbol from the graph, which we already determined was going to be a parentheses. So that would be your answer in interval notation. I just realized, I just saw it, I skipped part of 27, so I'm sorry about that. 27 also asked us to write the inequality, so the opposite. So in 28, we started with the inequality and we wrote it interval notation. 27 asked us to do the opposite, start an interval notation and write the inequality. So we picked the answer. We determined that the answer was A, but we didn't write it as an inequality. So you always start with X when you're doing inequalities. And then here, since we shaded to the right, we're going to use the key we wrote down here. It's going to be greater than -2. And then I did not put the little line underneath it. It's not greater than or equal to, because it was only a parenthesis at -2 and not a bracket. Okay, so any questions on 27 or 28?
No.
Okay. Now we're going to solve the inequality, and then we're still going to graph it and write it in interval notation. The only thing you have to worry about with solving an inequality that's different from an equation is that if you divide or multiply by a negative number, then you have to flip the sign because you have to jump to the other side of the graph. But otherwise, it works exactly the same as solving an equation like we were doing at the beginning of this review. So what would you do here as your first step to getting the X by itself?
So I would divide the -5.
Very good. And then what does that give you?
+10.
+10, good. What about, what else? With inequalities, you have to be careful with everything else also. So this would be X, and then what would this symbol be?
So you just said you would flip it, right?
Yes. So it would be greater than or equal to 10. So looking at your answer choices, is it going to be A, B, C, or D?
A.
A, very good. It's going to be a bracket because you have the equal sign here, so that's how you know it's going to be a bracket. So you can automatically eliminate this one and this one. You can eliminate the ones with parentheses. And then it's greater than, so you're going to shade to the right, so that's how you know it's answer A and not answer D, which shades to the left. Once you have the graph, it's normally not too bad to write it in interval notation, right? So I'm going to label my graph like I like to: -infinity on the left, +infinity on the right. And then you want to look and see from left to right, the first time that it starts to shade anything is at 10, right? And then just borrow the symbol that's there. So with a bracket, right? So bracket 10. And then it goes forever to the right, which is always +infinity. And with the infinities, what symbol do you always use? Parentheses or bracket?
Parentheses.
Parentheses, good. So let's check out number 30. Why don't you go ahead and solve that? Take a second and solve it, and then we'll go over it.
So now when solving this one, it leaves like a 0 on one side. So what are the rules with that?
So let's go over that because this one is a little tricky. When you distribute the 7, you get 35x plus 7 is less than 7. And then like you pointed out, when you subtract 7 from both sides, now you have 35x is less than 0. Okay, then when you divide by 35, what is 0 divided by 35?
0?
0, very good. 0 divided by any number is 0. Very good. So that is your solution. X is less than 0. So which graph would that be? A, B, C, or D?
C.
It would be C. Good. Certainly it needs to be at 0 and not at 7. So you can eliminate A and D for that reason. And then it's going to be a parenthesis because it's not equaling 0. Also, you're shading to the left. So for both of those reasons, it is C and not B. Good. So then how would you write that in an interval notation?
So it'd be parentheses, negative affinity, comma, 0, parentheses.
Very, very good. Yep. Forever to the left is negative infinity, and then you stop at 0 with parentheses. Very, very good. So 31, this is a little bit different. This is a compound inequality where it's basically telling you that x is sandwiched between those two numbers. So this can be read as 3 is less than or equal to x is less than 6. You basically want to get used to this notation because if you understand this notation, it's actually really quick and easy to graph with it. But in case you want to know where it came from, you can split it up. So you could think of this as being the same as 3 is less than or equal to x, and x is less than 6. So I basically just took this part and wrote my own equation, right, with this part, and then I wrote this as its own inequality, right? So, and then whenever you have the x on the right side of an inequality, if you want to flip it around, you normally want x on the left, then you have to swap the sign. So that's another time when you have to change the sign. So this would be the same as saying x is greater than or equal to 3 and x is less than 6, which is why I tend to just think of this as like a sandwich where x is between 3 and 6, right? This is like the outside of the sandwich and the x is the inside between the two. The same rules apply. So if you have a less than or equal sign, right, that's going to be a bracket. So in other words, there's going to be a bracket at 3 and there's going to be a parenthesis at 6 because it was just less than, it wasn't less than or equal to. So that's what you want to look for, a bracket at 3, a parenthesis at 6, and then they're connected in the middle. So which answer choice would that be?
D.
D. Very good. And then these are actually nice to write in interval notation because you can basically borrow it right from the graph, right? So this was a 3 with a bracket and a 6 with a parenthesis, and that is your answer. So bracket 3, 6, parentheses. So basically you're just grabbing the information right from the graph. So let's check out number 32. For this one, we're going to have to solve it first and then graph it and write it in interval notation. To solve these problems, your goal is to get the x in the middle by itself. So there's always going to be 3 parts. So it's not like you're trying to make one of the parts disappear. That's not going to happen. You just want to get the x in the middle completely by itself. So the first thing you would need to do in this problem is distribute. So the middle now becomes 3x minus 9. Everything else stays the same. So negative 6 is less than 3x minus 9 is less than or equal to 9. Now we want to get this x here in the middle by itself. So we want to be able to move everything else away from the middle. So right now we have a minus 9 that's kind of getting in the way, right? So how could we get rid of minus 9?
You would add it.
Add 9. Here's what's different. When you have an equation, you add it to both sides, right? But when you have a 3-part inequality, you have to add it to all 3 parts. So you have to add 9 on the left, in the middle, and on the right. So add it all 3 times to keep the inequality balanced. So what is negative 6 plus 9?
You got 3.
3 is less than 3x. The negative 9 plus 9 cancel out here. And then what is 9 plus 9?
18.
Good. Now what is the last step to getting the x in the middle by itself?
You would divide the 3.
And we're going to do it everywhere again. So do it 3 times. So 3 divided by 3, what does that give us?
1.
So 1 is less than x is less than or equal to 6. So what symbol are we going to have with 1 on the graph?
A parentheses.
Good. And what symbol with 6?
A bracket.
Bracket has the equal sign. Good. So where do you see that? A, B, C, or D?
A.
A. Good. And then how would you write that in interval notation?
Parentheses 1, comma 6 bracket.
Perfect. Okay, then I believe we have one more. 6 is less than 2x minus 2 is less than 12. So what would you do first here?
I would add the 2.
Good. So what would that give you?
That would give you 8 is less than 2x is less than 14.
Awesome. And then the last step?
Divide the 2.
Good. And what does that give you?
4 is less than x is less than 7.
Mm-hmm. So which answer choice would that be?
B?
B. Very good. X is between 4 and 7, and they're both going to be parentheses because there's no equal sign there. Good. And then how would you write it in interval notation?
It would be parentheses 4, comma 7, parentheses.
Excellent.